Page 51. Who is Pearl?
The baby.
The baby. Why does Hester call her Pearl?
Because she is precious.
She is precious. She's the only precious thing she has. It wasn't because she's like a pearl, right? Calm and serene.
She's just beautiful like one.
She is beautiful like one. And Hester paid with everything she had, right? She had to pay dearly, and Pearl is all she has left. And we find that as the child grows, she is beautiful and intelligent, but she's also a little odd, right? She has wild moments, which if you've been around children, most children are a little wild in certain aspects and have certain moments where they, I don't know if you want to say they're abnormal, but compared to adults, they're abnormal, right? So on the bottom of 51, she sometimes seems to lose the Pearl that she knows. And a lot of this chapter is going to be describing Pearl, obviously. Her name is on the chapter. And as she grows up, some of her characteristics that develop. And as I said, they might seem a little abnormal. Because, yes, she is a little bit of an odd child. But if you've been around a toddler, they aren't necessarily a set person all of the time. You have random emotions that come up because they haven't developed that filter of characteristics yet. They haven't developed who they're going to be per se, and so sometimes their reactions to things are not normal. That being said, Pearl is a little odd. So the bottom of page 51, second paragraph, technically, third paragraph, excuse me. This outward mutability indicated and did not more than fairly express the various properties of her inner life. Her nature appeared to possess depth, too, as well as variety, but, or else Hester's fears deceived her, it lacked reference and adaptation to the world into which she was born. The child could not be made amenable to the rules. In giving her existence, a great law had been broken, and the result was a being whose elements were perhaps beautiful and brilliant, but all in disorder, or with an order peculiar to themselves, amidst which the point of variety and arrangement was difficult or impossible to be discovered. Hester could only account for the child's character, and even then most vaguely and imperfectly, by recalling what she herself had been during that momentous period while Pearl was imbibing her soul from the spiritual world, and her bodily frame from its material of earth. The mother's impassioned state had been the medium through which were transmitted to the unborn infant the rays of its moral life, and however white and clear originally, they had taken the deep stains of crimson and gold, the fiery luster, the black shadow, and the untempered light of the intervening substance. Above all, the warfare of Hester's spirit at that epoch was perpetuated in Pearl. She could recognize her wild, desperate, defiant mood, the flightiness of her temper, and even some of the very cloud shapes of gloom and despondency that had brooded in her heart. They were now illuminated by the morning radiance of a young child's disposition, but later in the day of earthly existence might be prolific of the storm and whirlwind.
You got a Kleenex?
In the back, Shane. Okay, so Pearl is, as we talked about, she has some different characteristics, but one of these is that she doesn't really seem to follow earthly rules. Like, she doesn't behave in a certain way. She wouldn't be the perfect mode of a Puritan child because she doesn't follow these rules and she doesn't react in the ways she should be reacting. And another reason that Hester thinks this is because not only was she a product of sin, but while Hester was pregnant, she was going through anger and resentment and all of these emotions, and it's said that when you're pregnant you pass a lot of things on to your child because they're feeding off of you, literally. So she's feeling that a lot of these emotions she had toward people because she was in prison, right, and being treated poorly, were passed on to her daughter, and she sees a lot of these emotions and changes of emotions come over Pearl. She can be very loving at one minute, but then the next minute she has this defiant mood. Like she doesn't listen to reason, she doesn't follow the rules, which toddlers are at a point in their life where they're just learning rules, right? And want to test boundaries, which is pretty normal. But it goes beyond this, and Hester's worried about it because, remember, she keeps waiting to be punished by God through her child for what she did, right? The discipline of the family in those days was of a far more rigid kind than now. The frown, the harsh rebuke, the frequent application of the rod, and joined by scriptural authority, were used not merely in the way of punishment for actual offenses, but as a wholesome regimen for the growth and promotion of all childish virtues. They did not want children to behave like children. These should be young adults who follow the scripture, behave in a way that is quiet and reserved and following the laws, right? And we will make sure that none of this happens by being critical, using the rod, which would mean spanking and discipline, right? Before things even happen. So if she's not following the rules, could there be consequences coming? Remember when we first started, they said that they could just be there to watch a child be whipped at the whipping post for being naughty. This is a toddler we're talking about. But in the Puritan family, you don't behave like a child, okay?
Could they kill someone by doing that? They're still so young. Because their body hasn't fully grown. So.
I'm sure that it happened accidentally sometimes. We'll talk about other modes of making sure the child behaves as a child should behave during this time in this place in the next chapter, because there might be consequences for Pearl behaving as Pearl does, which we're going to continue to read about. Some of the things that Pearl does that might not fit into the Puritan
That's when you
society.
just stand back to them and let them.
So what does Hester do about this? Because she is raising her daughter as a Puritan. Hester Prynne, nevertheless, the loving mother of this one child, ran little risk of erring on the side of undue severity. So she's not very severe in her punishment, even though you should be as a Puritan. Mindful, however, of her own errors and misfortune, she early sought to impose a tender but strict control over the infant's mortality that was committed to her charge. But the task was beyond her skill. After testing both smiles and frowns and proving that neither mode of treatment possessed any calculable influence, Hester was ultimately compelled to stand aside and permit the child to be swayed by her own impulses. Does it matter what Hester does? No. Pearl's going to do what Pearl wants to do. So she tries her best to teach her right from wrong, and she's trying her best to be strict in when she needs to be strict, but it doesn't seem to matter. Pearl does what she wants to do. So at this point, who's really in charge? Physical compulsion or restraint was effectual, of course, while it lasted. So like holding her down or that kind works to keep her in one place while it lasts. As to any other kind of discipline, whether addressed to her mind or heart, little Pearl might or might not be within its reach in accordance with the caprice that ruled the moment. So it depends on her mood. Her mom tries to explain things to her, and she might be accepting of it. She listens, and she absorbs it all. But she might listen it to the intent of actually doing what she is supposed to, or she might not, just depending on her mood. Her mother, while Pearl was yet an infant, grew acquainted with a certain peculiar look that warned her when it would be labor thrown away to insist, persuade, or plead. It was a look so intelligent, yet inexplicable, so perverse, sometimes so malicious, but generally accompanied by a wild flow of spirits, that Hester could not help questioning at such moments whether Pearl was a human child. So if she gets this look on her face, there's no dealing with her. Like, she just knows it's going to be a waste of her time and effort to try to get Pearl to listen or behave or do what she needs to do. And it's at those moments that she questions, is this really my child? Or is this an offspring of something else? She seemed rather an airy spirit, which after playing its fantastic sport for a little while upon the cottage floor would flit away with a mocking smile. Whenever that look appeared in her wild, bright, deeply black eyes, it invested her with a strange remoteness and intangibility. It was as if she were hovering in the air and might vanish like a glimmering light that comes we know not whence and goes we know not whither. Beholding it, Hester was constrained to rush toward the child, to pursue a little elfin flight which she invariably began, to snatch her to her bosom with a close pressure and earnest kisses, not so much from overflowing love as to assure herself that Pearl was flesh and blood, and not utterly delusive. But Pearl's laugh, when she was caught, though full of merriment and music, made her mother more doubtful than before. So when she gets like this, her mom's like, okay, are you real? Like, the way you're acting is not normal. So she catches her in a hug and gives her kisses like, you're real flesh and blood, right? And Pearl laughs in happiness, but also it's a little wicked, her laugh is, which doesn't calm her mother's fears in any sort of fashion. And remember, her mom would be scared because this is a product of sin. So this could be a child of the devil, right? Because of the way she was born and Hester's beliefs. So when she does wild things like this, her mom kind of freaks out. But if you've ever been around a kid, yes, they can have very wicked looks. Maybe not to this extreme, because, well, does Pearl get away with a lot? Yeah, her mom doesn't quite know how to handle her. But you also have to think of it in the aspect of, does her mom have anyone to talk to see how to bring her up? She doesn't have her mother. Her mother's gone. She doesn't have any friends. No one wants anything to do with Hester. So there's no one around to help her. And this is her first kid. And she's worried constantly that Pearl's going to be a bad person because she was born out of sin. So that probably doesn't help Pearl's actions either, because she's feeding off of her mother's fears. And let's be honest, kids think it's funny when you get hurt or you're upset. Like when I pretend to cry, my boys laugh. It's not an abnormal reaction from a child. Okay?
My nephew will literally hit my mom and he'll laugh at it.
And laugh about it because they laugh at pain. They haven't developed that empathy yet. The more they get hurt, well, I don't know of boys, but the more they get hurt and the older they get, they're going to develop that. So she doesn't have anyone around to tell her that that doesn't mean your daughter's a product of the devil. It just means your daughter's testing her boundaries and what's a normal reaction, right? So, but this laugh frightens Hester even more. Heart-smitten at this bewildering and baffling spell that so often came between herself and her sole treasure, whom she had bought so dear, and who was all her world, Hester sometimes burst into passionate tears. Then perhaps, for there was no foreseeing how it might affect her, Pearl would frown, clench her little fist, and harden her small features into a stern, unsympathizing look of discontent. So most of the time when her mom started crying, she's like, "Why are you doing that? We don't act that way." We don't cry, Mom. But you think about all the things that they go through, she would have to harden herself to this too. But is her mom showing her that that's not a good reaction? No. Her other reaction might be, not seldom, she would laugh anew and louder than before, like a thing incapable of unintelligent of human sorrow, so it's funny. Or, but this more rarely happened, she would be convulsed with a rage of grief and sob out her love for her mother in broken words and seem intent on proving that she had a heart by breaking it. So as a toddler, you wouldn't quite understand what she was saying, but it would come out as, like, "Sorry, Mom," and she would cry with her, and show remorse. Very, very rarely. This is not super abnormal, we know, or I'm telling you it's not, by being around toddlers, it's not. But her first reaction is like a stern one. But you think in the Puritan society, do we show our emotions? So what she sees around town is or stern. So is it all together weird that that's her first reaction? It is to us, right? Like your mom's crying, really crying, and you're like, don't do that. But in the Puritan society, isn't that what she's taught? Don't do that. It's not altogether weird. Yet Hester was hardly safe in confiding herself to that gusty tenderness. It passed as suddenly as it came. Brooding over all these matters, the mother felt like one who has evoked a spirit, but by some irregularity in the process of conjuration, has failed to win the master word that should control this new and incomprehensible intelligence. Her only real comfort was when the child lay in the placidity of sleep. Then she was sure of her and tasted hours of quiet, sad, delicious happiness, until perhaps with the perverse expression glimmering from beneath her opening lids, little Pearl awoke. So her best times with Pearl are when Pearl's asleep, but as a mother, where this is your only person, and just as a mother, you love when they're asleep, and you can't wait for them to go to sleep, but then when they fall asleep, you miss them. So she has all these emotions when Pearl's asleep, which seem contradictory, right? You can't wait for her to go to sleep because she's a terror when she's awake, but it's also a little sad because, well, she's sleeping and I can't interact with her. How soon, with what strange rapidity, indeed, did Pearl arrive at an age that was capable of social intercourse beyond the mother's ever-ready smile and nonsense words. I keep losing my spot, I'm sorry. Then what a happiness would it have been could Hester Prynne have heard her clear, bird-like voice mingling with the uproar of other childish voices, and have distinguished and unraveled her own darling's tones amid all the entangled outcry of a group of sportive children. So she's to the age where she can play with others. And how awesome would it have been for her mother to hear her interacting with others, if that could be the case. But this could never be. Pearl was a born outcast of the infantile world, an imp of evil, emblem and product of sin, and she had no right among christened infants. Nothing was more remarkable than the instinct, as it seemed, with which the child comprehended her loneliness, the destiny that had drawn an inviolable circle around about her, the whole peculiarity, in short, of her position in respect to other children. Never since her release from prison had Hester met the public gaze without her. In all her walks about the town, Pearl, too, was there, first as the babe in arms, and afterward as the little girl, small companion of her mother, holding a forefinger with her whole grasp, and tripping along at the rate of 3 or 4 footsteps to one of Hester's. She saw the children of the settlement on the grassy margin of the street, or at the domestic thresholds, disporting themselves in such grim fashions as the puritanic nature would permit. So, her whole life she saw children keeping their distance, and children know that she is not to be played with because the mother, well, did the adults interact with Hester beyond what they need to? No. So no kid's ever going to play with Pearl, and she learns from a young age that she's not going to have friends in these people. But some of the games that these kids play sounds like a lot of fun. Playing going to church, perchance, or at scourging Quakers, or taking scalps in a sham fight with the Indians, or scaring one another with freaks of imitative witchcraft. Okay, so they play going to church, scourging the Quakers, because we need to get rid of them because they don't believe exactly what we believe. Or maybe if we play Indians, we're going to pretend take scalps because that might be fun. Or we're going to get rid of the witches. So you play the witch and I'm going to get rid of you. So fun games that these children play, right?
That gives your 4-year-old Call of Duty.
Pearl saw and gazed intently, but never sought to make acquaintance. So she knows better than to try to play with these kids. If spoken to, she would not speak again. If the children gathered about her, as they sometimes did, Pearl would grow positively terrible in her puny wrath, snatching up stones to fling at them with shrill, incoherent exclamations that made her mother tremble because they had so much the sound of a witch's anathemas in some unknown tongue. So she comes at them like with a witch's hatred. But these children, would they gather around her in a kind way?
No.
No. So in revenge, she picks up rocks and throws them at them and yells at them. Granted, we don't understand her words because, well, you wouldn't understand all of the toddler's words, but she yells at them and throws rocks at them. The truth was that the little Puritans, being of the most intolerant brood that ever lived, had got a vague idea of something outlandish, unearthly, or at variance with ordinary fashions in the mother and child, and therefore scorned them in their hearts, and not so unfrequently reviled them with their tongues. So these children weren't nice. So Pearl is just acting in, regular manner, right? She's defending herself and her mom by throwing rocks and yelling at these kids to get away because they're not nice. Pearl felt the sentiment and requited it with the bitterest hatred that can be supposed to rankle in a childish bosom. These outbreaks of a fierce temper had a kind of value and even comfort for the mother because there was at least an intelligible earnestness in the mood, instead of the fitful caprice that so often thwarted in her child's manifestations, meaning that this is a normal reaction, so that's comforting. It appalled her, nevertheless, to discern here again a shadowy reflection of the evil that had existed in herself. All this enmity, I can't talk today, I'm sorry, and passion had Pearl inherited by inalienable right out of Hester's heart. Mother and daughter stood together in the same circle of seclusion from human society, and in the nature of the child seemed to be perpetuated those unquiet elements that had distracted Hester Prynne before Pearl's birth, but had since begun to be soothed away by the softening influences of maternity. So Hester has gotten used to this, and she's had time to deal with it, and she's older, and she has Pearl, right? She has solace in knowing that she has Pearl, so she deals with people by going home and praying for them, and she deals with being by herself by knowing that she has her daughter and she's going to live an okay life because of this. Pearl is raised with people looking at her badly. Did she do anything wrong? No. Does she understand why these people are awful? No. So she hates them. And does she somewhat have a right to hate these people? They should not treat her wrong. She didn't do anything wrong. So even though Hester deals with it, she feels badly because, well, her daughter deals with it not so much in a positive way.